There is a moment in every soul's journey when the road vanishes, the signs disappear, and silence grows heavier than words. Most people get lost right here. When the light grows dim, most retreat. They begin their journey in faith with zeal, with clarity, with purpose. The path is visible, the sky is clear, God feels near, but inevitably the light begins to fade. The certainties they once stood on begin to tremble. Prayers go unanswered, doors close. The voice of God, once so clear, seems distant or silent. And it is here, right here, that most souls falter. They mistake the absence of light for the absence of God. But that is the great lie. For throughout Scripture, it is the darkness where God does his greatest work. He formed the universe in darkness. Christ was formed in the hidden darkness of Mary's womb. Redemption itself came not under daylight's applause, but beneath a sunless sky on Calvary. And so it is with us. The darkness is not your enemy. It is the veil behind which God hides his greatest treasures, but most retreat from it. They assume something is wrong with them. They think the darkness is punishment, when in fact it is preparation. They do not know that silence is not the withdrawal of God. It is the weight of his trust. Faith is not measured by how well you walk when the light is bright, but how steady you remain when it disappears. The saints, the prophets, the apostles, all of them passed through this night. Abraham walked without knowing where he was going. Moses climbed into a cloud to meet God. Christ himself spent 30 years in hiddenness before 3 years in the light. So, why do we despair when the brightness fades? It is in these moments that we must anchor ourselves not to feeling, but to truth. The truth that God is near, that he has not changed, that he has not abandoned. That the dimness is not death, it is divine design. Most people get lost here because they expected faith to be a feeling. But faith is not a feeling, it is a fight. And in this fight, the greatest strength is not found in those who shine in the spotlight, but in those who walk steadily through the shadows. If you are walking through darkness, do not retreat. Do not turn back. You are on sacred ground, and though you cannot see it now, God walks with you still. The road of obedience seems boring to the world, and that is precisely why so few walk it. It lacks the glamour, the rush, the applause that many crave. There is no spotlight on a soul waking up early to pray when no one watches. There is no viral attention for resisting temptation in silence, or for showing up faithfully day after day to responsibilities that go unrecognized. Obedience doesn't entertain the flesh, it disciplines it. And that is why it feels so small, so ordinary, so overlooked. But what the world calls boring, heaven calls holy. Obedience is not about performance. It is about posture. It is not about being seen by others. It is about being aligned with God. Destiny is not built in sudden leaps of greatness, but in 1,000 silent acts of surrender. The soul becomes strong not when it does what it feels like, but when it does what is right, even when it costs something. Especially when it costs something. This is where most turn away. They begin with passion, but when obedience becomes routine, when there is no emotion, no reward, no crowd, they believe something must be wrong. They assume God has left, but God hasn't left. He's waiting to see if you will remain. Because obedience in dry seasons reveals what comfort in easy seasons never can, your true devotion. Destiny is shaped in deserts, not palaces. It was in the desert that Moses was formed. In silence, Samuel learned to hear. In hiddenness, David was anointed. And in Nazareth, obscured and unnoticed, Jesus submitted to the will of the Father for 30 years before ever preaching a single sermon. And what was he doing all that time? Obeying, not chasing platform, not seeking approval, not trying to be seen. He was simply obeying, honoring his mother, working with his hands, listening to his Father's voice in secret. Obedience, then, is not boring. It is brave. It is the narrow road, and few find it because few are willing to remain faithful when the outcome is unseen. But make no mistake, this quiet faithfulness is building something eternal. One decision at a time, it is shaping your character, strengthening your soul, preparing your spirit. So when the path of obedience feels unremarkable, remember this. Even when nothing seems to be happening, everything is being prepared. Heaven sees, heaven records, and heaven rewards. Obey not because it is easy, but because it is eternal. The lie of comparison leads many astray not because they are weak, but because they forget that God writes every story with a different pen. In a world obsessed with speed, status, and spotlight, it becomes far too easy to measure your worth against someone else's timeline. You begin to believe the lie that you are behind, that you are not enough, that somehow God is blessing everyone except you. But this is a deception, quiet, subtle, and deadly. Comparison poisons joy. It turns gratitude into resentment. It makes you blind to your own blessings because you are too busy counting someone else's. What you forget is that you are comparing your behind, the scenes, to someone else's highlight reel. You don't see their struggles. You don't hear their silent prayers. You don't feel their pain behind the smile. You just see their progress and assume your pace means failure. But God does not measure by pace. He measures by faith. He doesn't crown the fastest. He crowns the most faithful. Look through Scripture. Joseph spent years in a prison others never saw. Moses wandered the wilderness while others mocked him. Jesus lived 90% of his life in obscurity, and yet not a single moment of delay was wasted. Heaven does not rush. Eternity is never in a hurry. When you compare, you begin to rewrite the story God is writing in you. You try to copy someone else's calling. You chase someone else's path, and in doing so, you step out of the divine lane created just for you. You exchange your purpose for their applause. But what if their spotlight would crush you? What if their success would destroy the version of you that God is still healing? What if what looks like a delay in your life is actually divine protection? You were never meant to be a copy. You were meant to be an original work of grace, carved out through fire, refined through trial, and shaped by His own hands. The potter doesn't ask the clay to look at other vessels. He asks the clay to trust His touch. Comparison is the thief of destiny, and the longer you stare at someone else's garden, the more your own begins to die from neglect. Focus on watering your soil, pruning your habits, tending your spirit. Because in due time your harvest will come, not sooner, not later, but at the exact moment God has ordained. So let others run ahead, let them shine, let them succeed. You are not forgotten, you are being formed. The quiet years are not wasted. The hidden years are not punishment. They are preparation. Do not compare. Trust the hand that writes your story. Comfort is the greatest detour, not because it looks like danger, but because it disguises itself as peace. It lulls the soul into stillness, not the holy kind, but the kind that slowly erodes conviction. Comfort tells you you've done enough. When heaven is still calling you forward, it whispers you deserve rest. When your spirit is meant to rise. And most tragically, it convinces you that the absence of struggle means the presence of God. But nothing in Scripture supports that lie. Every man or woman God used mightily was first dislodged from comfort. Abraham had to leave his home, Moses had to return to the land he fled, Esther had to risk death, Peter had to walk on water, and Christ himself had no place to lay his head. We were not made for comfort. We were made for calling. Comfort doesn't demand sacrifice. It doesn't require growth. It lets you live inside your preferences, your patterns, your self-made walls. But calling will break you open. It will stretch your faith, test your obedience, and drag your flesh to the foot of the cross. That is why so many never fulfill the fullness of their purpose. It's not because they were unqualified. It's because they chose what was easy over what was eternal. The path of least resistance is always paved with good intentions, but it ends in spiritual mediocrity. There is nothing wrong with rest, but comfort becomes a detour when it becomes your destination. And the danger of comfort is that it doesn't feel wrong. It's soft, it's safe, it lets you stay the same, but growth in God always demands disruption. It calls you to forgive when it hurts, to give when it costs, to trust when you can't see. And that kind of living cannot survive in a life built around comfort. Look at the cross. There is nothing comfortable about it. It is violent, it is raw, it is sacrifice in its purest form. Yet it is through that very sacrifice that life comes forth. So too in your life, fruit is not born in cozy places. It is born in crushed places, in pressing, in pruning, in surrender. So when the road gets hard, don't turn back thinking you've made a mistake. When the season stretches you, don't assume it's an attack. It may very well be the exact path God is using to refine your soul. The greatest breakthroughs are often hidden behind the greatest discomforts. If you find yourself on the detour of comfort, stop and ask, is this peace or is this avoidance? Am I walking in obedience or am I hiding in convenience? Because you can choose comfort or you can choose calling, but you cannot choose both. The kingdom is not built by the comfortable. It is built by those who are willing to carry a cross. Silence feels like abandonment, but it's the test of maturity. When God goes quiet, the soul grows restless. The prayers that once brought answers now feel like echoes. The scriptures no longer leap from the page. The warmth that once filled your spirit in worship is now replaced by a strange stillness. And in that stillness, doubt creeps in, not loudly but subtly. You begin to ask, where is he? You wonder if you've done something wrong, or worse, if he's left. But silence is not the absence of God. It is the environment in which your faith is revealed. When we are new in our walk with God, he often responds quickly. Like a good father teaching a child to walk, he stays near, he lifts, he comforts. But maturity demands something more. Maturity is proven when obedience is no longer fueled by feeling, but by faithfulness. It is when you still kneel to pray, even when heaven answers with silence. When you still serve, still give, still trust, even when the presence you once felt now feels veiled. The silence of God is not punishment, it is promotion. Because in silence, your motives are purified. Are you seeking him for who he is, or only for what he gives? Do you worship because he is worthy, or because he makes you feel strong? God's silence asks questions that noise never could. It examines the depth of your devotion, the strength of your convictions, the root of your surrender. Even Jesus, the sinless Son of God, experienced the silence of the Father. In Gethsemane, he wept alone. On the cross, he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If Christ himself endured the silence of heaven, then surely we will too. But that silence was not a sign of divine absence. It was the setting of divine glory. For on the other side of that silence was resurrection. Do not despise the silence. It is shaping you. It is stretching your spiritual muscles. It is building in you a faith that does not waver with emotion or circumstance. The silence is not a wall. It is a womb. Something is being formed in you that cannot be rushed. And the enemy will try to convince you that God's silence means he has stopped caring. But the truth is, silence is often where God is doing his most intimate work. The teacher is always silent during the test, not because they've left the room, but because they are watching closely. So if you're in a season where God is quiet, take heart. Keep going, keep praying, keep trusting. The silence is not abandonment. It is the sacred space where heaven watches to see if you have learned to walk by faith and not by sight. Those who endure the silence do not just know about God. They begin to know Him deeply, intimately, maturely, because when the noise fades and the applause is gone, and you still choose Him, that is when you become unshakable. You are not alone. You are being trained in trust. And when the silence lifts, you will find not only God's voice, but a deeper version of yourself waiting on the other side. So if you feel lost, stay. If you feel abandoned, trust. If the fire has dimmed, wait. Because most people get lost right here, but if you endure this valley, you will come out not just found, you will come out refined. You are not forgotten. You are being formed. Hold fast, for glory waits just beyond this silence.